everyone, and welcome to the Because Maybe podcast, the podcast that takes a look at all things 90s and answers some of the most important questions of the decade. Because maybe comic book movies are not that good. I'm your host, John Connolly, and thank you, whoever you are, wherever you are, for taking the time out of your day to listen to this podcast. Well, this week, what have we got for you? We have got From Page to Film, looking at some of the films of the 1990s that originated through the written word. We have some 90s trivia for you, and we take a look at some of the great speeches in political history. But before we get into all that, I want to thank everybody who is listening right now. This has been a long time coming. This is the first episode of what we plan on doing, and it's taken a while to get to where we are. This has been a labor of love, for lack of a better term, and this is something that I have wanted to do for a long time. I hope this meets everybody's expectations, if there are expectations for those who are listening to it. I want to keep this entertaining as possible. I know I'm not the funniest guy in the world, and I know I tend to ramble a little bit, but you know what? It's good. I like to talk, and I hope everybody will enjoy listening to some of the things that I have to say. It's gonna be something that I've been trying for a long time. I've always wanted to be on radio, and now with radio not being as big as it used to be, at least when I wanted to be on radio, this is kind of a nice happy medium, somewhere where I can host my own show, do my own thing, and, be fantastic. Before we get started, before we go into this, I want to just say a couple of things first. There are some things that I say that people will wonder, what the heck is he talking about? I'll say the word guys a lot. When I say that, I don't mean that for men only, women, whatever. I mean everybody. That's my way of saying everybody. It's hey guys, hey guys, hey guys. I mean, I have 2 daughters, and I say hey guys to them, and, it's just who I am. I apologize if that makes anyone uncomfortable. It's just how I talk. I also say we a lot when referring to the podcast itself. And what I mean by that is, while I've done the majority of the research, and the majority of the production, and the majority of the speaking, this has been a team effort. There's been so many people who you will hear in upcoming episodes on the show. 3 people who've been really, really helpful in particular to get in where I am today. And when I say we, I'm including those 3 as well, because they don't know how much they have helped me get to where I need to be. And, I'm thankful each and every day, and, I couldn't have done this without them. So what is the Because Maybe podcast? I know you're all dying to know why you're probably going to be wasting the next hour of your time listening to. Right now, there is a glut of 90s nostalgia. I'm as guilty of it as anybody else is. The thing is, when you see it, it's usually memes and BuzzFeed lists, and it's written by someone who's maybe in their mid-20s, who wouldn't have really experienced that much of the 90s and 90s culture. They may have caught the tail end of it, fine, whatever, but not so much people who lived it, and that's not a criticism to anybody. I'm trying to be lighthearted, and I'm trying to keep everybody engaged as possible, so please don't think that as a criticism. But I read some of these lists, and I don't identify it with any of it. A lot of it is, hey, look at this TV show, wasn't it great now, and then comparing it to some TV show that's not as good, or cartoon, or, just something small, and saying, man, one thing's great in the old days. And yes, they were, but not in the way that people might think. The 90s was a different time to what things are now. The 90s, there's a lot of things that happen, not just in the pop culture world, but in the world as a whole. And that's one of the things I want to look at. I want to look at all aspects of the 90s, to document it, to go through, I'm going to try and keep it as lighthearted as possible, like I mentioned. I want to keep this entertaining. I'm trying not to go as too dark as possible. But, there are some things that we've changed as a society during the 90s, in a speed that we hadn't done in any other decade before. For example, at the beginning of the 90s, the idea that everybody who owned a computer could connect to each other and share information, share files, communicate, that was a pie-in-the-sky dream. That was unheard of. Nobody had ever thought of doing that. CDs that would play music is one thing, but having a DVD that would play movies on your it just, that kind of thing, that sounds inconsequential. Then we had music movements, political movements. We had things like grunge come out of the woodwork. We had this big rush of British pop culture from the mid to late 90s. We had this big glut of girl power. We had independent movies becoming the norm, independent music becoming what was listened to. The alternative scene became the mainstream. We had countries basically disintegrate under your very eyes. We had hip political leaders, whether you like what they are now or hate what they are now, and it was just a very, very different time. Everybody was more loose, and everybody was more accepting of a lot of things. Now, there were some things that we were still in the dark ages on, don't get me wrong, but at least for that period of time, it was a different way of looking at things. It was different from our parents, which is every generation. But we are the generation that, you hear it all. We were the last to play outside and the first to get the smartphones. But not just that. We were the last people to understand why both of those things are important. But that's not just why the podcast is important to me. The podcast is important to me too. The subject matter is important, but I mean, just the act of doing this. Like I mentioned earlier, I've always wanted to be on radio. I always wanted to do something like this before, and I want to entertain, and I want to inform, and I want to build an audience. And I know that's going to take a lot of hard work, just other than me wanting something. But this is very important to me. I've worked hard. I've worked as hard as I can on it, and I hope you guys understand that I'm not perfect. I might have made some mistakes, and I'm trying. I'm doing my best. But the good thing is I like feedback. And we'll get to that here in a minute. The podcast itself is scheduled every Wednesday. So you're hearing this on a Wednesday. I'm actually recording this just a couple of days before. But every Wednesday we'll drop a new episode, and every Saturday on our blog, which you can check in the description, every Saturday we will drop kind of a teaser, a written word as to what we're looking at. If you haven't read this week's blog, I recommend you go and read it too, because it kind of ties into what I'm going to be recording. We'll be releasing this every week, but every 10 to 15 weeks we'll do 10 to 15 shows, then we'll stop. And that just gives enough time to plan the next block. I mean, I've already got 2 or 3 blocks set up. I mean, I've got a lot of material already ready to go. But we're going to stop and put the new list together. And, and there's sometimes as well we're going to be breaking around the Christmas holiday. We're going to be breaking around the New Year. We're going to be breaking again in the summer. Just, like I mentioned before, I'm a dad. I'm in my mid-30s, so I've got some other responsibilities outside of this podcast. But also it'll give us a chance to freshen up the format a little bit too. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for feedback. I'm looking for what you guys may like, what you guys may dislike, and that's what I'm looking for. So how can you guys support the podcast? Well, you don't have to. That's the great thing about it. This is just my plaything. But if you do want to support the podcast, we are on certain social media websites. If you look for Because Maybe Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Podbean, which is where we're hosting things right now. Also check out our website. It should be up and running by now. We might have some kinks in the system, but if you spot them, let us know. This is going to kind of be episodic as well, but every episode is going to have its own theme. The theme we're looking at today is called Scenes of the 90s. It's where we look at a movement or a small trend, and we try and put some sense into what was going on. We also have something called Cultural Impact, which is how we're still feeling the effects of something that happened during the 90s. We also have some political things that we're looking at. Nothing to, we're going to try and keep it as impartial as possible, because I don't want to get into this whole left v right, up v down, whatever debate. I want to keep this, like I said, entertaining. And also we'll be doing reviews. Now, if you are not a fan of the review show, just to let you know, they're going to be sandwiched in between the topics. So this week we're going to be doing a topic, and then the next week we're going to be doing a review, then we're going to be doing a topic and a review, and so on and so forth. It's just to keep everything fresh, and because there's a lot of things to look at too. As I mentioned, we've got the schedule going on every Wednesday. We're going to take a break sometimes, but guys, what I really need is feedback from you guys. I really need some suggestions on how we're doing. I really need to know how I'm doing too, because look, this is my baby. This is something that I've been working on for a long time, and I don't just want to give it up easy after a couple of episodes. But I can't know I'm bad at something if I'm not told I'm bad at it. That's one of the things. I thrive on feedback. I can't know I'm doing a bad job. If I'm not told I'm doing a bad job, you can't throw it against me. We're also looking for partnerships. We don't want any corporate sponsorship, and not because we want to fight the power or anything like that, but we realize if we go into corporate sponsorship, there are certain things we can't do. Our production costs are going to go up, and right now, we're at the bare limit, even stretching the limit as to what we can do. So we're maybe looking for just, plugs and partnerships. If, for example, you guys want a plug for your podcast, not a problem. I will gladly plug it for you. The only thing I ask in return is if you give me a plug. We scratch each other's backs and tickle each other's bellies, as my sister would say. But there's going to be more stuff like this coming out through the next couple of weeks. But guys, once again, thank you very much. I can't thank you enough from the bottom of my heart for helping me achieve a lifelong dream. This has been a dream for me. This has been something that I've been looking forward to doing for the last 15 years. Not so much a podcast, but just being able to get my own show out there. And I promise, if you give me some time and give me a chance to work through the kinks, this will be a great show for you guys to listen to. But again, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And this is episode 1. Here's to another 200 more.
Scenes of the 90s.
This week on Scenes from the 90s, we're going to be taking a look at 90s movies that originated in either book, comic book, or play form. Nowadays, when you look at movies, you can see comic book movie, book adaptation, comic book movie, play, comic book movie, Marvel, oh my word, Marvel, DC, and it's on and on. And it just seems like there's very few original ideas out there. Now, of course, that's not entirely true. There are tons of original movies out there, even in the mainstream Hollywood, they are out there. But I wanted to see how much of a new phenomenon that actually was. So I decided to do some research, and I wanted to look at movies from the 90s that were based on books. So in my half-day state, I trolled the internet for a little while and found 60 movies that were based on either a book, a play, which is being read in literature classes, that's why I'm including Shakespeare, or something that was a comic book. Not necessarily a superhero. That's one of the misconceptions, is that all comic book movies are superhero movies. That's not the case. And that's what I found. So I basically found 60 movies, 20 in 3 different categories. And today, I'm going to be ranking the top and bottom 3 in each category. Now, how I determined the ranking on this one was, I did some research on IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes. Not necessarily to see if one was better than the other or anything like that, but I wanted to get a good consensus. Some of the things I found shocked me. Some of the things I found were in tune to what I believed, but we'll get into that more later on. The 3 categories are adaptation. That is a movie that is about 75% faithful to the material and plot. Then there are based on movies. A movie that is based on a book, but either doesn't follow the main plot or makes too many radical changes to it that it's just a simple interpretation. Then there are comic book characters. That is where a movie that's been adapted from a comic book. Again, I would like to clarify, comic book does not mean superhero. Casper is a comic book movie, whether you want to believe it or not. Yes, Casper the Friendly Ghost, the one with Christina. Yeah, anyway. So, I want to see what we used. And, looking at the list, like I said, 60 movies. The full list is on our blog. I wanted to see what was the main genre. And, it turns out that funny movies are not liked by critics and not liked by fans either, as much as serious movies with emotional sting to them. That's why, the number 1 book is going to be what it is. Some of the things I didn't even know were based on books, and, it was a real shock when looking through this. One of the things I'm going to be talking about, one of the movies I'm going to be talking about is Mrs. Doubtfire. I didn't realize that was based off of a book. And then there are some that I didn't know had the movie made out of them. So, it's kind of, it's kind of a surreal experience. When it comes to books that became movies, full-on adaptations, a lot of the books were very, very serious, and you saw a lot of criminal activity, in the books. Just looking at some of the names here, just Fight Club, Rum Punch, which became Jackie Brown. You had Casino. So, these kind of movies are all in there. And, it was kind of weird to see that in there. Now, the comedy side of things didn't fare too well. And there's one book in the adaptation list that is so out of the ordinary that a lot of people didn't understand it. Full disclaimer, I studied it when I was in college. And I can even say even that is beyond me. When it comes to loose books, again, the good thing is there's a wide variety. I found out the kids' books got a bit of more of a pass the more they strayed away from the original source material. The more faithful they were to the material, the less they were liked. And then when it came to comic books, obviously there's your plethora of superheroes or supernatural, but there were things like I've mentioned before, Casper, Richie Rich, The Rocketeer, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, not superhero movies, but, again, coming off the comic book, coming off the written word, and, as far as I'm concerned, it counts. And yes, it is funny doing an analysis, looking at the difference between Richie Rich and Batman, But I was surprised that there were some things that were missing. There were very few coming of age books, which surprised me a little bit. The movies that I like that were made from books were all pitched in just over the millennium. And there are a lot of books that I thought, oh man, it'd be great to, 2000. Oh, it'd be great, 89, So, and too far into 89 for me to kind of give it a purse. Let's start with the bottom. Let's start with the lowest of the low, and we're going to start with the comic books. Ranked number 18 in the comic book list is Barbed Wire. Barbed Wire, one of the most over-the-top and boring plots. I think it was designed as a vehicle to put Pamela Anderson as a serious actress, and it just bombed spectacularly. The effects were laughable, the plot was worse, and it was basically a chance to get to see Pamela Anderson in skimpy clothes and leather. I don't know how faithful it was to the comic book, but if the comic book was as campy and as bad as the movie, I don't see it getting very far. It did kind of do well, but not as well as everybody expected. And critically, it was a disaster. It was an absolute mitigated joke, and in my opinion, it probably was part of the reason why Pamela Anderson was not taken seriously as a leading lady. I mean, it only takes one bad movie for that to happen, and unfortunately, Barbed Wire was a terrible movie. Ranked number 19 is a movie so bad that everybody who worked on it has denounced it. And that is Batman and Robin, starring George Clooney as Batman, Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze, and Poison Ivy is Uma Thurman. And my word, it's like somebody took the 1960s campy Batman series and recast Adam West and Burt Ward. It was terrible. Not even throwing Alicia Silverstone in there could make this movie any better. George Clooney couldn't turn his head. Chris O'Donnell just didn't want to be there by the looks of things. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Uma Thurman as the villains just phone it in. It is a bad movie. Now, pretty much everybody escaped that unscathed in terms of their career, especially when the director comes out and denounces it a couple of years later. It was too campy even for Joel Schumacher. And there are a lot of things out there right now. If you want to go look online at CinemaSins, it's one of their longest videos. The plot that it has is absolutely crazy. The acting is bad. There's no scientific advisor by the looks of things. They've got a Max Headroom scene. Barbara, Alfred's niece, is here to pay off the money that she owes Alfred because he's looked after her whole life and then takes part in such dangerous sport that she almost killed herself 3 times. It was bad. It was bad. And the fact that most of the cast made it out of that movie unscathed, to me, it boggles the mind. And finally, bottom, ranked number 20 of comic book movies, we have Captain America. Now, not the Captain America with Chris Evans that we all know and love. This was a Captain America so bad that they didn't release it. Like most things, it's gotten out there, and I haven't seen this movie. I'm not going to make an opinion on this movie because, like I said, I haven't seen it. I like to make opinions from fact. But reading some of the reviews on this, this is possibly not just one of the worst movies made in the 90s, but one of the worst movies ever made. Apparently the special effects made Superman 4 look like Jurassic Park. Apparently the plot made Batman and Robin look like Citizen Kane. It was a bad plot, bad acting, bad casting, bad effects, bad director, bad. And from everything that I've read, it is deserving as the bottom movie of the 90s in terms of book adaptations. So, we're done with the comic book movies. We've gotten those ones out of the way. We've gotten the Abominations out of the way. These were the 3 worst movies on the list, by some distance. And that's part of the problem that I'll get into here in a little while. Okay, when we look at the second category, which is adaptations, again, like I said, movies that stray too far from the original material to be considered a full, true adaptation, we're going to start with what came in at 18, and that is Eddie Murphy's Nutty Professor. What can I say about this? I actually liked the Nutty Professor when I first saw it, but then remember I was 13 years old in 1997, so all the fart jokes and as Kevin Smith once said in Chasing Amy, the money's in dick and fart jokes, and Eddie Murphy made a lot of money off of this adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And when I watched it, it was funny. And I mean, look, we still quote this around the house whenever somebody says something stupid or something somewhat jokingly threatening. We'll always tell them, "Come on, Cletus." They'll walk over, but they limp back. But I mean, yeah, it was just an endless string of fat jokes, fart jokes, and oh, look at me, I'm thin and I'm awesome. There were very few redeeming characters in that movie. The plot line itself, again, follows the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It was a product of its time. I don't think you could make a movie like that now. In fact, Eddie Murphy, I think, tried to recreate that with Norbit a few years ago. And, it's just after he almost won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, he mixed that crap. Not the worst movie in the world, but, I mean, for the purposes of what we're talking about, one of the worst that we had to look through. The film that came in 19th was Mars Attacks. And this one, I have to say, everybody got it wrong. Everybody got it wrong. The critics got it wrong. The people who watched it got it wrong. Everybody got it wrong. And I'm going to say this as a smug film student, I'm going to put my student hat on for a minute. Mars Attacks was not meant to be taken seriously at all. At all. It is a parody of B-movies. B-movies are terrible to begin with. But this parody of the War of the Worlds, in every way, shape, or form, is supposed to be ludicrous. It's supposed to be over the top. It had an all-star cast that everybody thought was wasted. I thought it was fantastic. Being Welsh, seeing Tom Jones, in a movie was great. It's just, people didn't get it. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why people look back at it and go, ugh. But I disagree. I think it's a fantastic movie. I think it's hilarious. And if you know going into it that it's not supposed to be taken seriously, and it's a complete parody of what those kind of movies were like, the old disaster movies, the old Attack of the Invisible Tomatoes and the Invisible Aliens and all that stuff. If you can get into that part of it, you think it's a great movie. But unfortunately, you guys didn't agree. And I don't just mean you guys watching it, I mean as a whole. And coming in rock bottom, we have Lawnmower Man. Oh, Lawnmower Man. Now, I'll be honest, I haven't seen the movie. That'll go for a couple of things in here. I haven't seen everything myself. I haven't seen Lawnmower Man. But the buzz around it was such that, yeah, it was panned by critics. It was panned by viewers. And the only thing I know about it for certain is that Stephen King was so horrified that he said it's Lawnmower Man in name only. He wanted nothing to do with this and demanded that his name be taken off the credit, which an author like Stephen King has written some great stuff and likes to get his name out there. And if he wants to take his name away from something like this, it's not that good. It is, yeah. Yeah. So now we come to faithful adaptations. The ones that, as I mentioned, made over 75%. Ranked at number 18, we have Mrs. Doubtfire. Apparently, the book is called Alias Madame Doubtfire by Anne Fine. I like kind of like the Nutty Professor. I watched it when I was younger, and I liked it. And a lot of the jokes wouldn't stand up right now. But Robin Williams was such a great actor. He pulled the emotion out of the scene in the ways that he was pissed off at the world because he couldn't see his kids anymore, and he'd do anything to see them. And the way he found a creative way to do it, and he brought in the humor. But the great thing about Robin Williams was he was able to bring emotion out of it. Unlike the Nutty Professor, it wasn't an endless string of fart jokes and fat jokes, but he was able to put over a sense of vulnerability in his character. And that's why Mrs. Doubtfire, yes, it ranks low in the adaptations, but it's still in the top half of all these movies, and that's something I'm going to get to later on. You could think the same thing about a great actor bringing together the humor and the raw emotion for number 19. In this case, Father of the Bride, Steve Martin, the man. I'm sorry, Steve Martin is a fantastic actor, fantastic comedian, and he has the comic timing to be just a great actor. I didn't understand this movie when I was younger, and I watched this movie a lot of times. Maybe, it's not a typical movie that a teenage me or even a preteen me would, should be watching, but a lot of the jokes went over my head and everything like that. But it was a great movie. I can identify with the character now. Even though I haven't seen the movie in many, many years, I still remember a lot of the scenes where Steve Martin's character did not want his daughter getting married, dealing with boys, because he still saw her as his little baby. And as a dad, I can understand that. Now, sometimes it's not healthy. I understand that too. But I mean, yeah, it was a really, really good movie. Diane Keaton did a good job too, of being the kind of, the anchor that keeps him sane. They've kind of done that in a lot of movies with husband and wives, where you think it's just a little off that these two people are together. One example I can give is the Meet the Parents series. Ben Stiller's character and Terry Polo, they have that chemistry, and it's that I call that Father of the Bride chemistry, because it was there. I like this movie. I'm surprised it ended up as low as it did, but there you go. Bottom of this, however, is a movie I expected to be bottom of this. The movie's called Crash. Now, it's not the Crash that was made, with Halle Berry several years ago. This one stars Holly Hunter. It is about a bunch of people who are in a strange sect of BDSM. And what they do is they take erotic pleasure in car crashes. And the first part of the movie, you see Holly Hunter's character's husband get killed by the lead character, and I can't remember his name, I apologize. And, she starts flashing him as they get rescued after the accident, and then they end up having an affair. Him and his wife already are having an affair because they can't stand each other, and it's just a very, very weird movie. It's very, very art house, and it was released, to the big screen, and I never understood why, but, yeah, it's just very, very, I don't know, it's very, very, some of the things people write is one thing, and how they adapted it. I will say this. I've read the book. I had to read the book. I had to watch the movie when I was doing film stuff. And I will say that the adaptation is good. It is very, very faithful. And you tend to... It's a movie full of anti-heroes. And I don't think there's anybody in the film you're supposed to like. And they do a really, really good job of that. But at the same time, unlike Mars Attacks, where it's supposed to be so bad and nobody got it, this one is very, very hard to get. So those are the bad movies. Let's go talk about the good movies for a minute. And we go back to comic books because that's the best way to do it. And we're going to talk about Batman Returns. That was number 3 in our system. Great movie. Wonderful, wonderful cast. Michael Keaton's Batman is probably the second best Batman after Kevin Conroy. Yeah. I went there. The animated Batman is far superior, but Michael Keaton is the best live-action Batman since Adam West. And I think he's better than Christian Bale's Batman, to be honest. Then you had a great cast of Michelle Pfeiffer, Danny DeVito. I think it was a really, really good movie. It was very, very dark. Unlike Batman and Robin, it was very, very dark and kept Batman to being Batman. Damn good movie. Tim Burton did a fantastic job. Great score by Danny Elfman. It was a really, really, really good movie, and I can understand why it's ranked so high. Number 2 in comic books is Men in Black. Now, I knew Men in Black was a comic book to begin with, but Men in Black, the movie itself, was one of the first movies that I actually sat through with, I didn't want to leave. I thought it was a fantastic movie. You wouldn't tell by watching, but actually the end plot was completely different to the plot that everybody filmed. 2 scenes with green screen were changed to make it, instead of the Earth being in the middle of a war, kind of like, the two bad guys are hiding behind the side of the Earth and shooting. It made it so that the Earth was going to be destroyed. I thought that was knowing that, I think that was a great plot twist. The acting in here is fantastic. Tommy Lee Jones. Oh my, Will Smith is Will Smith. Let's get that out the way right now. Will Smith is Will Smith. But Tommy Lee Jones, oh man. Deadpan comedy from serious actors is one of my favorite things. That's why I love Leslie Nielsen. That's why Airplane was such a fantastic movie, because everybody acted the jokes as serious as can be. Every scene that Tommy Lee Jones is in, you just have to watch, because it's either his facial expressions or is his sighing. He always is calm, cool, and collected, and I just, great plot, great supporting cast. It's a wonderful, wonderful movie. So those were number 3 and 2 in the comic book category. Now we're going to look at the back to the based on category, and we've got 2 books that are completely and utterly different, and I was completely shocked by number 3 in the based on books, and that is Army of Darkness. Now, yes, I understand what book is Army of Darkness based off of. Well, that whole series was based off Lovecraft's Necronomicons. I think I got that right. I apologize if I don't. Someone will correct me. This movie is in the so bad it's good category. It's cheesy. It's the whole way through. Every time you hear it, you're just like, ugh. The jokes are bad, but at the same time, it is so funny. I don't think it was meant to be funny, but it came out that way. Bruce Campbell, wow, he made that part his own. I think the reason why this one is loved a lot too, because like a lot of films, it's very, very quotable. And, my boomstick, and, just how the presence of Bruce Campbell in this movie was absolutely fantastic. Now, spoiler alert, I didn't like how they changed the ending. The ending that everybody saw in the movies was not going to be the original ending. The original ending was going to keep everything going, wake up in the future, not so much in this correct time period. But again, a fantastic movie, very, very quotable, great cast. Well, not really a great cast or a great story, but everybody made what they did good by camping it up so much. It is a very camp movie, and I think I agree. I think it's a fantastic movie. I wouldn't have put it as high, but there you go. Number 2 in the based on categories is my favorite book and one of my favorite movies, Trainspotting. Now, the reason I say based on, there's going to be a lot of people wondering who've read the book and the movies and gone, wait a minute, hang on. Why are you calling this only based on a direct adaptation? You have to merge characters, and you have to change scenes. But the problem with Trainspotting, and why I put it in this category and not the other category, was simple. If you've read Trainspotting, you know it's a collection of short stories. It is, Irving Welsh wrote possibly the best book ever written, as far as I'm concerned. And the characters, you're not supposed to like any of the characters, although you end up rooting for them. They all have they have very few upside, and they have a lot of downside. And by the end of the book, you don't recognize that, you recognize some of that downside as upside. The movie itself, it had to go in a straight line. It had to build a narrative. And so it cobbled together some of the stories and put the plot together, and that's what it came out as. A lot of the stories were attributed to other people. For example, one of the characters, Tommy, dies in the movie, but Tommy is still alive in the book, and his death is told from Matty's point of view, who died in the book. We don't see Renton's brothers in the movie, which were an important part of why Renton was what he was. Sick Boy doesn't get nearly enough screen time on his own. Same thing with Begbie. You don't see, don't see any part of Begbie's girlfriend, which is another important plot point. You don't see why Renton did go and sleep with a 14-year-old girl, and what the reasons were behind it, and why he was reluctant to keep moving forward, even though he did. in the book, Renton moved to London, but he wasn't followed by the other two characters. So I mean, you couldn't do a straight line story of the book because you had to cobble a lot of this stuff together. And Danny Boyle did a great job. The cast was perfect. Very few books and movies you look at and go, man, that is a perfect cast. You maybe have a perfect character. You maybe have somebody go, you know what, Arnold Schwarzenegger is the Terminator. But you could replace a couple of other people in that movie and it wouldn't have made a difference. Whereas in Trainspotting, you cannot replace any of the 5 main actors. Ewan McGregor is Renton. Robert Carlyle is Begbie. And, you know, so it was a great cast, fantastic visuals. You know, they did a fantastic job, and you know what, it deserves its position. Actually, in my opinion, it deserves higher, but that's not what the critics say. And again, we're not doing this on my opinion, we're doing this on the critics' opinion. We move back to the adaptations right now, and number 3 on the list is Silence of the Lambs. What a movie this is. One of my favorite movies of all time, and it's been such a long time since I've seen it. But it's just such a good movie. I mean, even the first 15 minutes. Everybody wondered why seeing Hannibal Lecter for the very first time made them unsettled, and after knowing everything that they knew about him in the first couple of minutes that they spoke about him. And when I was in film school, I learned that was to do with color palettes, and the fact that up until you saw Hannibal Lecter, the color blue was safe. You know, everybody who wore blue was the good guy. Everybody who was in a dark brown or red color was the bad guy. And this all scene of brown comes this blue outfit that Lecter is in. It's really good. Buffalo Bill is one of the scariest and creepiest villain I've ever seen. This movie was not without controversy. There was a large swath of accusations of homophobia, transphobia, and sexism. And it could be seen that way from a lot of angles, and it could be seen that it's not that way from a lot of other angles. I mean, it doesn't glorify anything. Just Buffalo Bill was just not there. I mean, he was crazy. He just wasn't there. And again, a great movie. If you guys haven't seen it, go look it up. It's got Anthony Hopkins in there, my hometown hero. A great score by Howard Shore, who would later go on to do the Lord of the Rings movies, amongst a ton of others. And I mean, yeah, it's such a fantastic movie. The number 2 movie is a movie that I've seen so few times that I can't really talk about it in great depth. It would be Goodfellas. Ray Liotta, Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro, 3 great actors. Just, oh my, wow, it's such a good movie. I was debating whether or not to use this in this list because it is based off of a true story, and that's one of the things I wanted to avoid. But I mean, it's been changed enough that it's still non-fiction, but it's fictionalized enough to where, in my opinion, I can get away with it. You know, it is set in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, I mean, it's such a great movie. It is. I mean, a lot of the cast would go on to star in The Sopranos. It stars Samuel L. Jackson in there, too. Joe Pesci is the star. I mean, no matter what anybody says, Joe Pesci is the star. And before he kind of traded all his seriousness away for the Home Alone movies, it was a tour de force of a performance. Great movie. I think it does deserve its number 2 slot on the list. And yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. So before we talk about the top movie in each category, we're going to talk about some honorable mentions. These 3 movies, one in each category, the 3 who I thought were my favorite in all of those that I haven't mentioned yet. So in the comic book category, we have The Mask. The Mask was actually, the comic book itself was written and produced by the same people who made the Barbed Wire comic. And this, unlike the Barbed Wire movie, this showed what you can do if you had a good cast behind it. Jim Carrey was on his ascent at the time. Cameron Diaz making her debut. You had Richard Jeni in it. I love Richard Jeni as a comedian. It's sad that he's no longer with us. But I thought it was a good movie. It was typical 90s cheese, and you know, again, very quotable. You know, to this day, people will still go smoking to people. You know, and I thought it was a great movie. I thought, you know, it had its drawbacks. It did. I mean, you could tell how over the top Jim Carrey was, but at the same time, it was well done. The special effects were a little hit and miss. I'll be completely honest, but I liked it. I thought it was good. In the based on category, we have the Muppet Christmas Carol. My favorite holiday movie. Wonderful, wonderful movie. And the reason I say it's based on rather than a complete adaptation, you have the humans who are faithful to the novel. Then you have the Muppets who are faithful to the Muppets. This was the first big Muppet project after the death of Jim Henson, and so you had the new Kermit the Frog. I think it's his son Brian. But it was a really, really good movie. It was bright, it was colourful. Michael Caine is Scrooge. He pulled that part off superbly. From the anger at the beginning to the love at the end, he was really, really good. But kind of a little uncomfortable in my regards, because you have Michael Caine, kind of like Patrick Stewart, and Alec Guinness, this top-notch British actor, either saying ridiculous lines, being put in ridiculous situations, or in Michael Caine's case in this movie, acting with Miss Piggy. Which is a line very few people like to say, but again, wonderful, wonderful movie. Waldorf and Stadler as the Marley Brothers I thought was fantastic. That's the only way I think they could have got Michael Caine's butt in gear. The anachronisms between modern day and Dickensian London. This is the American way, and then he's corrected to the Eagle is corrected to say the British way. I thought that it's silly, but I thought that was hilarious. It's a really, really good movie. If you've never seen it before, number one, why not? Number two, if you have children especially who like the Muppets, you have to watch this movie at Christmas time, because it is a fantastic movie. However, if you're like me, you can watch it at any other point during the year, and it'll be okay. And we go to adaptation, and my honorable pick, my selection was Jurassic Park. Where to begin with Jurassic Park? The CGI still stands up. That's the legacy. You combine CGI with models, and that's what you get. Jurassic Park was phenomenal. Brilliant cast. It had the Goldblum. It had Samuel L. Jackson. It had Sam Neill. Great, great actors. I mean, okay, the Goldblum isn't a great actor, but I mean, he played the part perfectly. It just the sleazeball lawyer. Oh, I hate it. I cheered when he got it. The fact that the dinosaurs looked real was a great use of models and CGI, and it was such a great movie. It did kind of feel like a Stephen King type movie. I think Steven Spielberg said that he wanted to make Jaws with dinosaurs, and it shows. It's so good. I mean, the sequels and the reboots haven't been as good, and you can see why. In my opinion, if this movie wasn't made, but the sequels would have been treated as great movies. But because they were eclipsed, kind of like The Matrix. The first Matrix was fantastic, the other two not so much. Jurassic Park is a benchmark for anybody who wants to make movies. And anybody who believes that movie making is easy, you just point a camera and get the right people in. It shows what a lot of hard work can do. I thought it was great. The Nedry character was a little bit over the top for me, but I can understand disgruntled employee. I get it, but it was just too far as far as I was concerned. But aside from that, one of the greatest movies of all time. Now we come to the top of each category, starting with comic books. And I think when I mentioned that I was going to do this, one of my work colleagues, he said, "Well, you got to have The Crow." And that's it. That's number one in comic book category. The Crow is possibly the best comic book movie ever made. And its notoriety, unfortunately, because of the death of Brandon Lee, kind of covers up the fact that it did seem rushed. But of course, it had to have been rushed after his tragic death on set. It was so dark. It was so surreal. If you've never seen The Crow, number one, you can't claim to be a 90s kid if you've never seen The Crow. Number two, watch it. It is such a good movie. Now, warning to, if you are under legal age, it's not supposed to be a kid's movie. Like a lot of the comic book movies now are geared towards young adults and teenagers. This one is not. This one is purely an adult movie. And the effects on it are so good. It still holds up today. It has a legacy that outreaches beyond just movies. I mean, the face paint, and it might just seem cheesy and tacky, but a lot of people have made a lot of money off that face paint. it's the most iconic use of black and white face paint since Kiss. Great movie, great acted. Everybody did their job really, really well, and it was it was fantastic. We got to based on, and the number one, no surprise there, is Disney's retelling of Hamlet using lions. Yeah, we're talking The Lion King. Possibly the greatest animated movie of all time. Not just in the 90s, I mean of all time. The story holds up to this day. I mean, it's a retelling of Hamlet. And, it's so good. The cast was perfect. The fact that they killed on screen one of the main characters in the first act of the movie. You just wanted to hurt one of the people who made the movie, because how dare they do this? It was so emotional, well put together. The sound effects, now taking Timon and Pumbaa aside, which is the only downside of the movie, and that's good too. Don't get me wrong, but it's those two and Zazu were the real down points of the movie. The music was on point. The music was fantastic. It felt authentic. It wasn't, I mean, a lot of movies based in other parts of the world with other cultures tends to get westernized. But they were really as authentic as they could be with their music, with their instrumentation, with their arrangements. It's, even to this day, if I watch it, I'll shed a tear. It's a lasting movie. It is one of my favorite movies. And again, possibly the best animated movie of all time, hands down. If you can tell me something that's better, that has a better soundtrack, better cast, better story, and more emotional value, then I'd like to see it. If your animated movie contains nothing but fart jokes, I don't want to hear it. And now we come to adaptation, and that is one by Rita Haywith and The Shawshank Redemption. Now, confession. This is another movie that I haven't seen. So I can't really say too much about it. But it's considered one of the greatest movies ever made. And the sheer fact that it is number one of the greatest book adaptation of the 90s, when you combine the list, we combine my list with IMDb, it is the greatest book adaptation of the 90s. It's got a really great cast with Morgan Freeman and Tim Robbins. It's got a really great story. It is a fantastic, fantastic movie. Probably by the time that this podcast is released, I'll probably have sat down and watched it. And I'll probably update the blog and hit social media up. But what a movie! What a movie from all the critical acclaim, from what the critics are saying, what critics said, from what reviews have said. So if you've not watched it, like me, we need to go out there and watch it. It's going to be a great time. But The Shawshank Redemption, hands down, wins the best book adaptation of the 90s. And and there's nothing that's a high claim, because like I said, the 60 that I've picked have got some real heavyweights in there. You got Fight Club and Babe and Forrest Gump, and for Shawshank to come out on top shows you what a good movie it was. So that's basically the fact. Now we come to the opinion part of the thing. I've realized that there is a big difference between critics and viewers. For example, in IMDb, Forrest Gump ranked in the top 3 of the list that I have, ranked in the top 3 of reviews, garnishing 88%. On Rotten Tomatoes, the movie itself only received a 71% rating from the critics. That is a huge discrepancy, and why that's a huge discrepancy is Forrest Gump was in the bottom category. But then you look at that again, Babe has got 97% freshness at Rotten Tomatoes, but the audience only liked it for 67%. When kids' movies are being rated on these websites, they're being rated like they are The Godfather. I mean, come on, guys. It's not, I understand Matilda is not Shakespeare, and it's not The Godfather, and it's not, not Star Wars or anything like that, but I mean, it's a kids' movie. You can't compare it to that. It's like comparing a marathon runner to a sprinter. It's like comparing a mixed martial artist to a boxer. You can't do it. It's not right. They're two completely different things, and comparing them, it makes you or the thing look bad. The list of comic books and the list of partial adaptations, surprised me a little bit in how low they were viewed in esteem. Aside from our top three, there was a big cliff as to what they fell off. In fact, the comic book movies did the worst. I mean, the top comic book movies would only have gone halfway up the list with the exception of The Crow. But, I mean, comic book movies were dire in the 90s. They were absolutely abysmal. They were absolutely abysmal. Half of my list is under 50% in terms of approval. And I mean, you had Batman Forever, you had the Ninja Turtles, you had Judge Dredd, the Sabrina movie, Tank Girl, and Casper. They just didn't resonate. Comic book movies did not resonate with audiences in the 90s. Now, they would in the 2000s, because every comic book that was adapted was based off of a superhero or something that kicked ass. But when you have Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Ninja Turtles, Richie Rich, and Casper, and The Rocketeer, it was just hard. It was just hard to produce good quality movies. Do I agree with what these lists are? Not in all cases, but I can see why things would be ranked low and things would be ranked high. The lists are about as accurate as I can make them, but again, if you want to go look at the list, it is on our blog. Check the description for the link. And that leads to our question this week. What is your favorite movie that is based off a book, a play, or a comic book? And why is it? It can be non-90s if you want it to be, but go online, leave your answer, #BMPod, and, we'll go ahead and call it the best ones next week. And, guys, did we leave any out? Are there things on this list that I've talked about tonight, you can go, man, what about this book? If you can think of something, great. I'd like to hear from it. The more obscure, the better. I would love to hear of some really, really, some movie that is really, really good that was based off a book that I don't know about, and that's what I'm looking for. The more obscure, the better. Let's get involved. Go to our social media sites. The links are in the description. And, just use #BMPod, and we'll go ahead and get this discussion started.
A date which will live in infamy.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
So, before we get on with some 90s trivia, I'd like to take a moment to talk a little music with you guys. If you are over 21 years of age and are in the Arklatex area on the 21st of October, why not head out and see 90s tribute band and friends of the show, the Holodecks, who will be playing at the Tiki Bar on East Kings Highway in Shreveport, Louisiana. The show starts at 9, but due to limited seating, you might want to get there just a little early. And here is the best part. Entry for this night of 90s music and entertainment is 100% free. That's right, there is no cover at the door. The Holodecks live at the Tiki Bar, 639 East Kings Highway in Shreveport, Louisiana. Free entry, and the show starts at 9. For more information, go to theholodecks.com. That's the Holodecks, HOLLOW, decks.com. Or check out their Facebook page at facebook.com/holodecks. Okay, let's get some 90s trivia out the way before we wrap everything up. Usually we're going to go through from Sunday to Saturday, so we're going to be going through from the 24th to the 30th. I think that's a pretty good range. And let's see what happened in the 90s during this last week. On the 26th of September 1990, NC-17 became a rating in the United States film industry. On the 29th of September 94, O.J. Simpson Jurors was selected, and we'll be talking about that in a future episode. Also on the 29th of September, this time in 96, the N64 was released in the United States. On the 24th of September in 1997, the Sci-Fi Channel was born. And a mere 5 days later, one of my favorite albums, Urban Hymns by The Verve, was released. And on September 30th, 1997, the greatest technological product of all time was born. Internet Explorer 4. So, that's how this week was great in 90s history. So, guys, we're nearly at the end of the show, and once again, I got to repeat the social media question of the week. What is your favorite movie based off a book, and why? If you want to use the hashtag BMPod, we'll go ahead and get the discussion going. I want to hear from you guys. I want to know what it is, and I want to know some of your obscure movies that were made out of books. I want to hear it. It's going to be great. You can find us on social media, on Facebook and Twitter and Tumblr at Because Maybe Pod. And we are on some other sites as well. All that's in the description of the podcast. And we are looking forward to doing another one of these next week. Next week, we're going to do our first review segment, and we're going to be reviewing 2 of the best video games of their kind that were released. We're going to be looking at Super Mario 3 for the NES and Super Mario World for the SNES. We're going to look at kind of their background, where they came from, how the hardware changed, and everything like that. Once again, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to listen to this. We appreciate every single thing that you guys have done to make this dream a reality. And, we're looking to build an audience, like I mentioned earlier. And, the more, the merrier. If you like what you hear, subscribe, give us a like, share, tell 2 friends who can tell 2 friends, and so on, that, hey, you've got something to listen to. I think you'd enjoy it. I'm looking forward to hearing some of your feedback too. Guys, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.